Here we are. Hi, my name is Matt Haggman. Would like to welcome all of our audience members who are joining us for this extraordinary conference. I think all of us, Trey, Russell, and I, were just talking off stage, so to speak, about the fact about how cool this is to be in a conference that includes the edge of you two. And so wanted to thank everyone for joining us for this really important conversation we're about to have about the future of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, and moving beyond diversity to equity is the question that we're really going to dig in on. You know, it's clear that after the last 6 months, that returning to business as usual is not an option on several fronts, and that achieving racial equity in the workplace will be one of the most important issues that companies will tackle in the coming decade. And it's important, I think, to pause here for a second and just think that this is one of the most important questions. I think it's been the defining question, honestly, for our country. To briefly give some historical sweep, it's important to remember this: we are a country that for 250 years had slavery, for 100 years had Jim Crow, legal segregation, and for 55 years has had systemic racism. That is what we inherit. What we inherit as citizens, that's what we inherit as entrepreneurs, that's what we inherit as human beings. And that's that's something that we all have to grapple with. And today we'll talk about it specifically in the context of the workplace. In just a few months, countless companies that don't talk about racism publicly have spoken out to condemn racism and police brutality. Consumers and employees are looking for companies at all stages of growth to commit to action, but the how of that action is often less clear. So I'd like to welcome Trey and Russell. I'm going to have each of them briefly introduce themselves, but like to welcome them for this important conversation, and would like to ask everyone who is in our audience, and I'll bring this up a couple of times, to please put questions that you have in the chat. I will be sure to ask them. But we want to make this as interactive as we can, even as, and my background is I'm on the board of Endeavor Miami and was at Knight Foundation, where I launched the work at Knight about using entrepreneurship and propelling entrepreneurship as a way to drive community change. But before that, I was a journalist for 10 years, most of that time at the Miami Herald. And so I love asking questions. So I'm going to be throwing out lots of questions, but please want to get to yours, so include them in the chat. And with that, Trey, why don't you kick us off with an introduction, and then we'll get right to what I think is a really important conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. I'm so pleased to be on the panel. My name is Trey Boynton. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the global lead of inclusion and collaboration strategy in inclusive futures and strategy at Cisco Systems. Excited, and the way I describe what I do is I essentially, using a collaborative and co-design approach, is I try to embed inclusion into everything that Cisco does across our global ecosystem, and with the ultimate goal to sit in the service of fairness and equity. So super happy to be here. Thank you so much.
And Russell?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Like Trey, really excited to be a part of this session today with both of you. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Director of Global Culture, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Walmart, based in Bentonville, Arkansas. And I and my team have responsibility for our enterprise strategy, branding, outreach, benchmarking, and employee engagement around those culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives globally and enterprise-wide. And when we think about that work, really our vision is to create a culture in our workplace and in communities where everyone feels included and where our associates feel engaged and empowered to bring their best authentic selves to work, to be high performers, to deliver on our shared purpose of saving people money so they can live better. Really excited, again, to be a part of this and to talk with people around the world about inclusion and what's going on in the here and now around race and equity.
Terrific, terrific. Well, thank you both for taking the time to be part of this conversation. To start off, I really want to sort of get a sense of where we are, right? And as we think about, moving beyond diversity and inclusion to true equity in the workplace, how would each of you characterize where we sit right now? Trey, do you want to kick us off?
I think that depends on the workplace, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's really subjective around environments and what practices, habits, rituals, goals, aspirations, cultural norms. I could keep going and going. Like, what makes a company, right? And then you have to find out where you are and where you've been. And I think that you could be on any part of that spectrum, right? You could be first starting to realize that you need to start thinking about diversity, inclusion, and equity and connectedness, belonging, whatever you want to call it. You're still trying to define the terms, to having a long history that I think Walmart and Cisco have, which is this concerted effort, this clear function, this clear desire, a North Star, if you will. So I think it's subjective and it's dependent upon the company. And I offer that regardless of the size or the history, is that if there's any moment to do it, good news. Today's the day. So, and I think for people that are waiting for the moment or waiting for a signal, you at it, any moment is the moment. When you kind of actually ask yourself the question, is it time for us to invest or double down or whatever that looks like? Is it time to consider equity and inclusion in our work? The answer is always yes. So good news, come on in, the water's great, the time is now. And I think to whatever level you think about that, part of that is, as you think about it as a strategy, as a company, we have business strategy, we have organizational culture, and tend to both of those things. I would offer that if you are not embedding inclusion into either one of those, then you are missing opportunities. And so I think, really it's doing this kind of self-reflection as an organization, whatever your leadership team looks like, whatever your culture is to really do that reflective moment of where are we and where do we want to go, and setting that landmark and heading in that direction.
And your sense right now, as you pointed out, right now it's sort of all over the board in terms of what we're seeing with companies right now. Do you see though obviously it's something that we're all talking a lot about, but as it relates to companies, has there been a real awakening where more and more companies are seeing this as a critical part of how they do their work?
Yeah, I do think that. So as we look at diversity and inclusion in corporate America, right, and in business, we've seen kind of these stepping stones of almost epochs of diversity and inclusion as a field, right? First, it was counting people. Who's in our business? How do we know who's here? Do we have representation? What does that look like? The next then started to think about inclusion. Oh, they actually need to talk and contribute and be participants in the business. That'd be great. Yes, appreciate that. Third, now I think we're in this third epoch, which is really thinking about what does it mean to leverage the collective brilliance of the team? Right? I talk about reducing barriers to brilliance, because they exist on so many fronts. And if you're not thinking about that across the full spectrum of diversity, which is what we think about at Cisco, we think about it everywhere across all of the identity categories, right? I come from an academic background before joining the industry, and really thinking about who are we talking about, and how are we designing and being inclusive even in who we're talking about, because it can be easy.
Yep. And
I think that's balanced also with the need to focus on communities that are facing acute realities of inequality. And you have to constantly toggle that. But what I do know is that oppression as a system, inequality as a system, a set of behaviors, beliefs, principles, practices, they tend to replicate. So once you unhook and start to think about, parity, when you think about whether that shows up in pay or engagement, or you're looking at cultural norms, all of those things, as long as you are thinking about it across the full spectrum of diversity among multiple dimensions and embedding that into your rituals and practices, that's where I think we're headed as an industry, as a D&I quote unquote industry. that's kind of where I see this kind of third phase of where we are.
I love that construct. Russell, sort of as we set the stage for this discussion and think about where we are, and we're going to talk about to where we want to go to, does it seem to you also to be sort of pretty a wide variety of examples of companies embracing D&I and then many who are still early on that learning curve? Or are you seeing actually much more?
No, I would completely agree with Trey. You know, we have the opportunity to benchmark with a lot of companies, and you'll see people who are coming at this, you know, relatively new, early level, you know, companies who are more sophisticated and have been at this work for a long time. But it definitely is a continuum. You know, I think many of us who are around this D&I work have heard, you know, this truism or some form thereof in the past, you know, that diversity is asking somebody to the party, and inclusion is asking somebody to dance, you know, or something along those lines, you know, something similar. But I think as you enter the notion of equity into the equation, you know, that changes things to where if diversity is asking somebody to the party, having representation, inclusion is asking them to dance, ensuring that they're able to participate, then equity is who has the ability to ask someone to dance, you know, because equity is all about that shift in the power dynamic. I shouldn't have to wait to ask for somebody to invite me to dance. I should be able to go up and ask anybody that I want to dance, or somebody should be able to come up and ask me. And so that's what we're seeing as we're starting to explore this equity issue, and particularly as it relates to race and the historical timeline, Matt, that you outlined in the beginning, is that there's been a break in the social construct in terms of, you know, the way in which our country has been built. It's built in such a way that it advantages some and disadvantages others. And so, you know, the conversation that we're starting to have inside Walmart and with some of our partners is, how do we understand the history of race? How do we understand how systemic racism has been put into place? And then how do we identify structural groundwater type of remediations and interventions to be able to change that structure? Because, you know, quite frankly, the systems of inequity that exist in our country and society are not broken in so much as they are operating exactly the way in which they were designed. These race-based policies are operating exactly how they were designed, but that means that we've got to examine them and realize that, you know, these were put in place, again, to advantage some and disadvantage others. And if we want to be able to get to true equity, if race-based policies and practices are the reason, then we need to have race-based solutions in order to be able to get to better outcomes. And in so much, we need to help people understand the nuance and the difference between equality and equity, in that, you know, equality is everyone gets the same, equity is everyone gets what they need. And if we were to just start today and give everyone exactly the same, we'd run the risk of widening the gap before we close it, because we have to actually look at, you know, what's in place right now and realize that you have to take a tailored and nuanced and differentiated approach to people who find themselves othered or in marginalized populations, and realize that you can't put the same interventions or supports or strategies in place for them that you can everyone else. It takes a differentiated approach. And so that's where the work gets really hard. And I think that's where, you know, companies who have been on this journey for a while, a compliance-based approach is what many companies have started doing with their D&I journey. You know, the point of entry, you do, what the law asks you to do. You check that box, right, or you do what the law tells you not to do. You walk up just to the line, but you don't cross it. So, that's going to get early gains and outcomes when you're starting out. But then invariably, and this is where a lot of companies found themselves, are, mine included, is you plateau.
Yeah.
And so what we've been doing at Walmart is shifted our approach from that transactional compliance-based approach to diversity, and rather focus more on the inclusion side, which is a more sustainable and transformational and business-led, and really kind of rooted and steeped in neuro and social science to help our leaders understand how this is good for business, how we as humans interact, where bias comes from, how it manifests, how we can recognize and mitigate it, and then how we expand our own cultural competence so that we can truly create a more inclusive environment where diverse individuals, and let's be honest, diversity is a naturally occurring phenomenon. We'd all like to have more of it, retain what we have, and maximize the output from the diversity that exists. But the way in which we do that is through creating an inclusive environment.
So with that in mind, as we think about sort of as you both framed it, this journey that we're on right now, of course, we're at this moment of social and political upheaval where people, of course, want to have a voice, right? I mean, this is where people want to express themselves, which, of course, creates an interesting question for companies. Many companies, you can think of a Ben & Jerry's or a Patagonia, actually sort of wear it on their sleeve, their social mission. Whereas others, it's a different, I think they're walking a bit different line. And you could think of examples like, for example, Starbucks, when they initially told all of their employees they weren't to have Black Lives Matter pins on when they were serving customers, and then reversed themselves. I'm curious to hear from each of you, how should companies, and how are you all thinking about this, but how should companies, but particularly entrepreneurs, because many of the people who are listening right now are early stage, building a company right now, how to think about these questions of allowing employees who want to speak out to be able to do that, but then to also align with the interests of the company. Do you want to start us, Trey, on that question?
Sure. So I think I'm of two minds. So I before joining Cisco, I was in a late stage startup, and I was their first head of diversity and inclusion. I was employee 400 something. And I think for me, when I got to Duo Security, based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I'm broadcasting from right now, the thing about was that I would offer that the first diversity and inclusion lead was the CEO. He and his co-founder built a culture that was inherently driven towards inclusion. And for me to wrap a complex diversity strategy around it was not needed, because it was just in the rituals and the behaviors and the practices. You don't need to have this complicated, complex kind of fraught process to just say what you care about. And I'm super proud that this week, Cisco just launched our social justice beliefs and actions in support of the Black community, literally hot off the presses Wednesday. And what the beliefs stand for. So we believe in technology for good. We believe in addressing insecurity of being. We believe in coalescence. We believe in justice. We say these things, it's clear what we stand for. And what they offer is they are inspirations in the moment. The moment will change. Right now, the Black community is asking us to respond. And Cisco is ready to be bold, brave, and deliberate about the 12 actions we've outlined across every facet of our business to support the Black community and create impactful, long-term, committed change. But you got to start with what you believe. You got to start with your values. And so I think, for me, values are what guide us constantly when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. And if you actually value authenticity, full self to work, like all of these sometimes cliche terms that we talk about with workplace culture, if I actually want you to do that, I have to think about what guidance, what parameters do I give you and how you can do that. Because part of it is I can bring my authentic Black Lives Matter. I can also bring my authentic self to work and say, I don't believe that discrimination exists. You got to be clear. about which one you mean, because they have an impact on the people that experience the world in which we live, right? We know that society, and Russell, thank you so much, society is operating exactly as it's designed, and that people are a product of the society that we all experience. It is not that we create these organizations that exist as a bubble of society. No, everything that happens comes with us. Sexism, racism, heterosexism, ableism, xenophobia, homophobia, whatever you want to call it, all the isms and obias, they come right on in with us. Yeah. And if we don't clarify what we mean when we say we are against racism, when we are pro LGBTQ plus community, like when we calibrate that for folks, then we give them an opportunity to engage, an opportunity to engage with us in a conversation and in behaviors and in rituals and in coming together in the service of something bigger. And I think that's where anybody can do. An organization of 2 to an organization of 200,000. Anybody can do that.
Russell, I know you want to jump in.
Yeah, no, I think that well said by Trey. You know, I think what society and people, citizens have come to expect of corporations and businesses shifted, and rightfully so. You know, and I think about, you know, the historical model of the role of the corporation. You know, back in the 70s, you know, it was established that your role as a corporation is to return value to your shareholders. And so, you know, the Business Roundtable, you know, just recently kind of updated and amended that thinking. And our CEO, Doug McMillan at Walmart, actually is the chair of the BRT. And, you know, I can't personally think of a better leader, somebody who's really out, you know, in front, leading on a lot of these social issues, including racial equity. One of my favorite lines from Doug is that you can't push a rope forward. You've got to be out, and if you want to lead, you've got to be out in front, and you've got to be pulling things through. But you know, the Business Roundtable amended that historical thinking of the role of the corporation from, you know, simply delivering return to shareholders to a business has to create shared value. You have to do good while doing well. You have to not only drive business results and profitability in return for your investors, but you also have to do right by your employees. You also have to be a good corporate citizen as it relates to stewardship of people and planet. And so, you know, it's no longer enough, you know, in the case of Walmart, for us to simply deliver everyday low prices to our customers and say that we're beating their expectations. You know, lots of businesses are able to deliver everyday low prices or something, you know, closely equivalent to in this day and age. You know, now our customers also want to know, you know, are those products responsibly sourced? Yeah. Are the people who are working all up and down your value chain, are they empowered? Do they have rights? You know, do your employees have you know, opportunity for growth and advancement? And so all of these are good things in the spirit of increased transparency when you're talking about operating a business, because you're ensuring that you're creating the type of business that you want in your backyard, that you want to patronize, that you want to work for, or that you'd want your your friends or your children or your other loved ones to work for. And so, you know, the way in which we've shifted the model is incredible, and a lot of that comes from the grassroots voices that you. Over the past brands, you know, some that people on here would probably recognize: Bonobos, you know, Jet.com, Eloquy, and others, and with them have come, you know, a much more entrepreneurial spirit and an early career workforce with a lot of ideals and voices that, you know, quite frankly, have been a wonderful and refreshing invigoration to our system. And, to Trey's point, whether you're talking 2 or 200,000, or in our case, 2.2 million, creating that space where everybody feels like their voice can be heard and they can add value is really how you start to drive change. Just over the past few months, with all of the things surrounding the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, we've had a lot of listening sessions across our business, senior leaders with their teams, and the things that we're doing right now, enhancements to our HR processes, curriculum and training that we're putting in place around racial equity. A lot of that has bubbled up from ideas from our associates on what do they feel like they need, what do they want to see to help us improve and get from where we are to where we need to be.
So, with that in mind, Russell, as we think about the person, many of whom are with us right now, who has a company that right now is 8 people, right, is 5 people. I mean, Juska is maybe 50 people. What would you say to that person to build not just inclusion, but equity from the ground up in that company that's just in its early days?
Yeah. I'd say wherever you're at, there's some things that you can do. We like to, label them as the 3 L's: listen, learn, and lead. One of the critical components to inclusion is curiosity. And are you out there, pressure testing what you know? Are you trying to expand your cultural competence and, become cognizant of your bias? And a lot of is listen. I am a straight white male. I am a person with a disability. But am I out there listening to my female colleagues and taking in stories and content from women, from people of color, from people who are gay or transgender, because that's not my lived experience. But if I want to be a more inclusive leader and drive for equity, then I need to understand the lived experience of people who look different than me. And so that's listening and goes along with learning. What are you reading? Are you taking in information that's simply, going to confirm your own biases? Or are you taking in information that's going to, test your thinking and expand your perspective? From a perspective of racial equity, are you reading books like Stamped from the Beginning, or How to Be an Anti-Racist? Are you, listening to the 1619 podcast and plugging into different things that are going to expand your perspective if that's not where you find yourself living every day? And then ultimately, are you leading from your position of influence? People often want to do the grandiose big thing, but we're not always in that position to be able to do that. But if you have a company of 8, are you looking at your compensation and saying, are women and men doing equal work for equal pay? Are people of color and Caucasians similarly? Am I really being intentional in the assignments and opportunities that I'm giving to everyone? And so, if you start at the beginning and really are intentional in engineering inclusion into your talent processes, because the HR talent lifecycle is the most insidious place where bias exists within a corporation, whether it's your selection and hiring, your promotion, your compensation, your assignment, your offboarding. If you can identify those potential bias places in your HR talent process early on and put bias disruptors in place, then as you grow and scale, you're going to be so much further ahead than businesses that have been at this for a long time and are trying to figure out how to go back in and retrofit.
And boy, do we know we need that, particularly after seeing the comments by the Wells Fargo CEO, Charles Shaffer, earlier this week. Need that at the very top. Trey, I want to turn to you to build on that question. And thinking about what are some of the questions or tools that startups can use to self-evaluate around diversity and inclusion and equity in terms of how they're doing. I mean, it's, when so many have a desire to do this and are trying, but what are the ways in which to self-assess in terms of how well doing in that effort?
Right. I think it starts with, I think about it in terms of treating D&I like a product. Like, actually think about, what do you do when you're trying to go into a new market? What are you trying to do when you're developing? You do research, right? You do research, you understand what the market looks like, you understand what tools that can support you. How do you do your own kind of R&D on where are you in the market and where are people doing really good work that you could model, and where is their market share, right? Like, where is there an opportunity, right? Which means it is all the components of get back to the good old journalist questions for you, Matt, and really say, like, who is in our company? How are we getting them there? What is their experience when they get here? And then repeat. It is literally just asking you, and the great thing about small businesses, you all can hire 4 people and change the trajectory of your representation. Yep. Whereas places that are, I just heard Russell talk about the number at Walmart, and I'm like, whoo! Like, the levers that we have to pull at larger organizations have to be enterprise-wide, digitized. They have to be pervasive and wide, which is why digitization is a lever that Cisco often uses in order to create scale, right? Inclusion at scale is how we call it. But I think for the wonderful thing about a small business is you could look around and you could say, y'all, how we doing? Who's got an open role? Let's be focused. It's the intent. It is the named intention to be thoughtful about who you and then following through on that. Let's treat it like a product. You got to design, you got to test, you got to debug, and you iterate and you repeat over. You go to market. It is all emotions that exist in a company. Inclusion should be one of those motions. It's a business imperative. I think we're past the time, fingers crossed, that we don't have to kind of make the case for diversity anymore, I would hope. But let's say you do, that's where you start. But if you're already there and you have this kind of collective commitment from leadership, from the company and the culture, you get to go, okay, well, let's do something. Let's design. Where is there the best way to create movement? Where is there the best way to see results? Yes, or room for improvement, and then you learn along the way and you tweak and you move and you pivot and you follow through, and then for things that are successful, you nail it and you just keep at it in a relentless fashion, and you stay committed regardless of the market forces that are around there, because you either are for it or you're not. It's kind of a binary. There are a few things that I think are on a binary. Most things are on a spectrum, but I think your commitment can't be. And so I think then you design the things that are out there, and there's so much available to you, whether that's you bring in consultants to run your offsites all the time. If you can't afford someone to have a people function in within you, you bring that in, you outsource that. Do the same thing. Yeah. The things you care about, you create airtime, resources, literal time. The most precious resource that any company has is where people spend their time and what they talk about. All of those things can be determined as a priority. It's a wonderful opportunity in startups because, right, out of a group of 10, the next 5 hires you make, you change the trajectory.
Yep. Now, I'm very curious just to get your response. Trey, you mentioned that we reached a point now where you think so many recognize the importance of diversity. But I think we're all really struck when we saw a CEO of a major company at Wells Fargo say, oh, well, diversity is important, but actually the pipeline is very limited, so it's hard. I'm curious, you may not be able to respond directly to that comment from that individual. I'm curious at a minimum to get your reaction to that sentiment that, oh, we're trying, but the pipeline is actually not that great. Trey, do you want to kick us off on that?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. The early, and I think with the question that we just responded to, which is what questions can we answer? And Russell talked about, bias, eradicating or mitigating bias in your processes. Part of it is questioning, what do I know to be true? And is that the system talking, or is that a real conversation? Is it a fact? Or is it my perception? Is it true that we can't find good talent?
Right.
Everybody would tell you no. Right? I think when we start to question how do we know things, again, I'm going to go in a little bit of theory, if you'll just indulge me. We are socialized because the system has built up these messages around who is good, who is bad, who is smart, who is not, who is talented, who is not. Here's what we know. Intelligence and effort are universally given, but education and opportunity are not. Some of the smartest people we know never attended a college or university. And some of the smartest people we know never attended an elite institution from the 4 that people are trying to recruit from. The same 5 institutions that everybody's trying to recruit from, right? When we think about it from a place of there is abundance of brilliance, just the barriers for us to see them. What a reframe, right?
Totally.
I am struggling with seeing talent is the question. Like, what if we thought about it rather than it's hard to find is, where else could it be? We're asking the wrong question. And the question is broken because we've been socialized to actually make a judgment based on scarcity. What if we actually, and this is where I always orient, is in abundance. There's so much brilliance out there. I just got to get to it. I just got to make sure that they know I'm looking for them. I need to make sure that I'm turning over exhaustively all the ways in which I know how to look for talent. I need to fly the flag that we welcome all types of talent in both quote unquote traditional ways, because that's the system, y'all, and non-traditional ways, because we put value on that, right? Some of the best coders we know are self-taught, never went to an engineering class. Mm-hmm. And we also know that some of the best leaders we have are in their 2nd or 3rd careers, right? And it's just this opportunity to completely flip the script on what do we know to be true? Is this true? How do we get a critical consciousness around the question that we're even asking? And that's the practice. The practice is to question, is this a truth? Where did I learn this? Is this really fact? Or is this just something that I've kind of just had happen in my brain over time, because that's the system working exactly as it's been designed to make assumptions and judgments based off of things that are just kind of passed on through the history of discrimination, bias, oppression, inequality, all of it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And Katina, if I think we're supposed to wrap at 3:15, but Katina, shoot me a note in the chat just to be sure leading the ship here on time. But Russell, want to turn to you. For entrepreneurs on the call, we're all entrepreneurs on the call, if looking for really good models, and of course, each of your companies are great models to look to, but if you're looking for models of companies that are doing this well, where would you point them?
That's a great question. And I would say, from an entrepreneur perspective, Walmart, we're the biggest mom and pop in the world. I mean, our founder, Sam Walton, started with a single 5 and 10, on the square in downtown Bentonville, nearly 60 years ago. For those who are on from Endeavor, Northwest Arkansas, you'd recognize that. But that shows where you can get to in just a few generations if you start. But one of the things that that Sam started with, very early on were our values, and Trey talked about, values being so important. They go hand in hand with diversity and inclusion, really, if they're operating at an optimum level, and we really talk to our leaders about lead with our values, put our values of service to the customer, respect for the individual, strive for excellence, and act with integrity to practice in your everyday behaviors. And if you do that, regardless of where we go with our business, whether it's, Bentonville, Arkansas, or, on this call, Miami or Ireland, or, from a Walmart perspective, where we operate around the globe, from Shenzhen to South Africa and points in between, if we lead with our values, then everything else is going to start to fall in place. So, from that perspective, I'd look to those companies that really have a strong corporate culture. One that I admire especially is Southwest Airlines. I love their corporate culture and the way in which they live that out. But in terms of companies who are really doing this diversity and inclusion work well, and kind of looking across sectors, there's a lot of different benchmarks and indicators that you can look at. One that we look to and that we participate in is the Diversity Inc. Top 50 companies, and that's really going to be a measure of your Fortune 1,000 scope companies. Who participate in that index. And you're going to see companies from across industries: healthcare, hospitality, retail, professional services, and consulting, technology represented there. So whatever type of business you're trying to develop from an entrepreneurial perspective, chances are there's going to be a comp out there from a corporate perspective, maybe even a corporation that you might be looking to do business with or be a supplier to with whatever you're starting to stand up, that you can look and see how are they doing it, what are their policies and practices, and what can I learn from those to try to bring back to my business, whether I'm just getting started or whether I've got 50, 100 or more employees.
Trey, I want you I would love to hear from you on some of your favorites as you look out, across the country or around the world. But I also want to layer on a question from Danielle, who asked, what are the pros and cons of bringing someone in? And I think she's referring to sort of in a consulting role to focus on diversity, inclusion, equity issues versus hiring someone full time. And this is, in thinking about a company that's sort of on the cusp there, not a giant corporation,
right,
but just and growing. So with that, Trey, I turn to you with those two questions.
So you want me to close quickly? Okay, I'm going to go fast. I think for me, the companies that are doing it right are leveraging the companies that focus on this, right? So at any stage, you could think about things like Project Include, the Kaport Institute, all of the D&I consultants that are kind of out there doing remarkable work, and you see them at the major conferences, right? You see them presenting at things like Grace Hopper. You see them at Blavity and Afrotech, right? You see them at Lesbians Who Tech. Like there are organizations that are community focused, and if you see people showing up there, that's probably who's doing it right. So note to self, probably show up there, right? Also, and I think, I said it before, I think every company has the opportunity to invest in diversity right now, starting today. You get to coach yourself up as of right now to be the leader until you can hire someone. And only you know that in your kind of company trajectory. And I would offer that, again, the value that you place on it and the way you link it to business strategy, if it is inextricably linked, then you see it as a core value. And I understand not everybody can do that in an early startup phase. However, what you can do is designate and create a culture where everyone is trending towards this. And the way in which you execute on that when you don't have someone there is you need to have a diversity plan. And the reason why diversity plans fail is you have no clear vision for change. You don't have any backbone in the organization, and that doesn't have to be one person. You don't have any metrics, you don't have no accountability, and you don't really have kind of any way to measure what you're doing. 4 out of 5 of those things are free. A vision is free. some communication and a clear messaging of what you're getting after. Accountability is free, metrics are free, and a backbone organization can be embedded into the things that you already have. So there really is, there's no cost loss if you are struggling with that. It's really around all the things that you could do right now, tomorrow, next week, this year, next year, that really sit in the service of what you're trying to accomplish. You actually can do a lot of the things that you need internally, and it's just a matter of investing strategically about how to get the right mindset. So what is that message? You leverage the diversity solutions that are available. Your biggest resource are most of the things you already have. You already have engagement pulses. You already have cultural values. You already have employee engagement practices. You already offer benefits. Are they the most inclusive benefits? You already have practices, policies, and procedures that you're executing. How do you make them inclusive? And leveraging strategically, maybe a consultant to come in to do an audit for you, to give you some direction, and then off you go. Until you're able to do that on a basis where you can sustain that yourself. It's really leveraging and being very thoughtful and strategic. And again, like I said, treating D&I like a product. Terrific. Design something that you want to see, test it out, do that. I had hypotheses left and right. This is going to happen. Oh, didn't work. Let's tweak it. Hey, I think this is going to be a huge game changer for us. Once we created an employee value proposition that was inclusive, it wasn't a diversity statement. It was an employee value proposition. Here's why we want you to join us. And embedded in that was all the language around inclusion, equity, justice, representation, so that it was wrapped around it, so that you knew who we were the minute you read why we wanted you to come and join us. That is how you make strategic choices to showcase to others that you are committed and that you'd like them to join your organization, and then repeat that. And I wanted to tell the truth when people, what I did not want to do, and here's the challenge, right? And I'm watching my time. The challenge is that if you are not yet diverse, how do you get diverse, right? Mm-hmm. That's one of the biggest questions I get. Here's what I know in my life. Some of my best mentors never looked like me. Best leaders never shared the same identities that I had. And I was honored to work for them. It was a pleasure to be a colleague with some of the leaders who stood there and said, I will stand for this, I care about this, and we are going to execute on this. And we came. We came because we want to work for someone who we believe in and who's giving the company meaning. Meaning matters right now. Anybody can go to work. But you put me into a purpose, I'll come work for you and I'll work my butt off.
You know, that's a really important point as we wrap up, is that how this actually creates a real competitive advantage for a company. That if you do this well, this presents an enormous competitive advantage, whether it's with a customer or in attracting employees. So we've got 2 minutes to go here. At least my clock. Oh, we have 1 minute, 3:14. So I just wanted just in a few sentences to leave on a note of optimism here at a time when, of course, we're going through really dramatic social and political upheaval in our country and around the world. What leaves you with a sense of optimism in a few sentences? And Russell, we'll start with you and then go to Trey.
Yeah, I think it's the way in which we've responded to what's happened in the world. And I think it's a confluence of circumstances. You know, when George Floyd was murdered, we were in the midst of the pandemic. We were forced to sit in front of our TV and sit with that as a collective body, as a nation. And I think we had to feel the weight and the heaviness of that, because, he was not the first unarmed black man to be killed by the police. And sadly, I hope he's the last, but sadly, most likely he was not. But I think that caused us, this moment in time. You've got to find the silver lining sometimes in the midst of a pandemic or a crisis. And I think it's that, this happened at a time where we all had to sit there and we couldn't turn off the TV. We couldn't go do something else because there wasn't much else we could do. And I think as a result, there's people who are mobilized for this that haven't been in the past, and we're seeing real momentum and sustainability. And I think that's what gives me hope, is that this is different than any point in time that I've seen before. People have stood up and they're continuing to stand up, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Trey, to close us out.
I talked about it. I think I hunker down on hope in times where it's taken a hit. And what I notice is that I have more people having conversations that I've been having for a long time. I am seeing new people doing their own good work. And I think that what I'm seeing is it's not just that we are defining racism as the small number of things. We are defining racism as all the hundreds of thousands of things that our society has taught us. And rather than just think about it like this, we are looking at systemic racism and all the practices and the behaviors. And I love that I have people who are outraged and have literally no skin in the game. I love it that people are out. We've had enough. I'm not even in the community and I am outraged. And I think when we have allyhood that starts to look like a lifestyle rather than a fad, that is what I see. I see some lifestyle choices around operating in ways that are anti-racist every single day. And I hope that we can.
Well, with that, Trey, Russell, thank you very much for a terrific, really extraordinary conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for moderating.
Thank you so much for having. Russell, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of your work, friend.
Likewise.